Coach Rankin, I really appreciate you joining my staff here at Williamsville College today, talking to us a little bit, and we're also recording this audio for the Big Time Strength podcast for everybody to listen to. So really appreciate your time. Why don't you get started and just give us kind of a little background of your journey through strength conditioning so far and where you're at right now.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Oklahoma City, grew up playing soccer, and spent my first couple years of college soccer at University of Colorado. My second year, I ended up redshirting because I knew I wanted to transfer out. And so that year I was redshirting, was in the weight room a little bit more. My strength coach was Sarah Ramey. She's now at West Texas A&M. And just really got to love the weight room. So I always knew I wanted to stay in sports in some capacity. But that kind of showed me that was the career path I wanted to take. So when I transferred to Oklahoma State to finish out my career, kept taking classes to do what I needed to do for like an exercise science type degree. And then when I got done playing at Oklahoma State, I interned in the weight room there for a year and a half. I got to work with softball, women's soccer, and equestrian. And every once in a while, I got to lead an equestrian group through what they were doing, some running and circuits and stuff like that. First paid job was at University of Arkansas, and really got that, I think, off a reference from Ramey because she knew the head football strength coach there, and worked there for a year with 3 top 20 programs were the main teams I was with. So I was with I will say I got blessed with and I got handed really good programs. I didn't do it myself. I think I contributed, but they were already good when I got there. So women's tennis, women's golf, and then women's cross country. And then I helped out with literally every other sport there except for football and men's basketball. Was getting ready to be off my parents' health insurance, and a full-time job presented itself at UMKC up in Kansas City, University of Missouri, Kansas City. The guy who hired me there had played, Tremaine Carroll had played football at Oklahoma State when I was playing soccer there, and then we interned in the weight room together at Oklahoma State. So a pretty good connection there. Worked under him for a couple years. He would never say that I worked under him. He'd say that I worked with him. We were very complimentary. We were a really good team. And he took a new job at South Carolina State after a couple years. I was actually the interim director for 4 months, which was pretty cool because it was scary at first thinking I'm going to take over all these teams that True did such a great job with. You know, those kids loved him. But in the same way that I got hired at Arkansas, got thrown into the fire, I kind of got thrown into the fire at UMKC also, and that's actually kind of how I best operate. So for 4 months, I was interim director there. We hired a new director, Paul Arndorfer, working under him for a couple of years, and then just decided I want to go back to, there was no really growth for me as far as, Paul was going to be there for a while, so I wasn't going to turn into a director. So it was just kind of time to go somewhere else, and ended up getting a job at University of Kentucky, which was really cool. Was there for 6 years, worked with both swim programs, women's soccer, and then for a period of time took over track and field, most of track and field anyways. And so it was really cool being at Kentucky, being back at that high level, really competitive, all that type of stuff. And then February of 2018, my wife took a job as a soccer coach up here at UConn at University of Connecticut. 19 months apart. We spent most of our relationship apart. 19 months of marriage apart. I just kind of decided it was time to stop doing that. And it happened to be that Jay Mendoza was leaving his job at Eastern Connecticut State. I had like 5 people reach out to me and say, hey, there's this position open at Eastern. You should apply for it. So I've been up here since September of 2019. So.
Awesome, Coach. And that's a really great background. You got a lot of great experience. And this is kind of a different call for our big time strength listeners. I have my whole staff on here, so I'm going to kind of let them pitch in and ask some questions. So our first question for Coach will come from our graduate assistant at Williamsville College, Jillian Brown.
Hey, Coach Rankin. I just wanted to know any advice for a young female strength coach that you wish you knew when you were young and entering the field?
Yeah. My thought really is to just get involved with as many sports as you can, but especially men's sports. So I actually heard, I think it was Corliss Fingers talking the other day on the play roundtable. Like, she grew up kind of in football, and I think you don't see a ton of women in football anymore. I think it was a little bit different then because before the 5 strength coach rule with football, women did work with football. That was just kind of the way it was because football strength coaches had Olympic teams as well. So I think a big thing is making sure you don't really pigeonhole yourself to being with female sports only. A lot of times that's the way it goes, is that you hire a female strength coach and she's working with female teams. I don't care working with men, women, whatever. I think, we're all there to achieve the same things, but just not getting pigeonholed with just women's teams. I will say, to kind of go along with that, I'm getting ready to present for the CSCCA about some cares and concerns of female strength coaches, and one of them is financial. So when you talk about, football, basketball, those are like the heavier revenue sports. So if you're not working with those sports, your chances of making a little bit more money go down. But along with that, more money usually means a higher title. So instead of being an assistant strength coach, you're a director. And if you want to get a seat at the table, you have to be a director. You've got to have a voice with everything. So just not pigeonholing yourself to just women's teams. Make sure you get out there and work with men's teams and gain a lot from them, and try to stay engaged with them as much as you can, just making sure that you don't kind of seclude yourself to one little area.
Coach, and I want to go back to your bio real quick. And you said that you've been at Eastern Connecticut since September. Excuse me. So I would like to know, maybe describe the culture of the program that you've established there so far. And you're obviously not too far into it, but maybe just what you hope to build, continue to build once we obviously resume after coronavirus period.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I came in, Jay Mendoza had been here for a year. He's up at Brandeis now, up in the Boston area. And before that, there had been a strength coach here for 3 years. So there's been a lot of turnover, which is something that, I've always been a stable spot for all my athletes, from having stayed with a program for 4 to 6 years. So I kind of feel bad that they've seen so much turnover and they've had to get used to a new strength coach every single year. So yeah, kind of like you're saying, when I came in, I didn't really know what the culture was. Really kind of the big things I'm looking for, number one is commitment. So being at a D3 school, off season is purely voluntary, which has been hard to get used to, but the kids who are bought in, they come in anyways. They're not complaining, they're coming in and doing their work. So commitment being that big piece, and just trying to get everybody in the weight room, even if it's the off season. Being coachable, I think that's a huge piece, because if you don't fully invest in the whole process, then you're not going to get what we want you to get out of it. So just being coachable, being able to take criticisms, but also take praise when we dish it out too. Discipline, and I think that ties into just showing up every day. If you can get yourself to just show up every day, even if you know that your roommate who's on your same team doesn't want to go in because they had a late night, whatever. But just staying disciplined and showing up every single day is a big piece of it. Hard work is a big staple of my programs. I kind of always say I grew up in Oklahoma, which is a pretty blue collar state. And I'd say, pretty similar to Missouri, like you're used to showing up every day, working hard, and that's what it takes to be the best and to be the best version of yourself. So, sports is the same thing for sure. And then trust. So just being able to trust us that we understand how to write programs, we know how to kind of work them through, that their coaches know what they're doing. But those are kind of the main things I want for the culture of the weight room to be, is just showing up every day, working hard, trusting the process, and being bought into a team concept.
No, that's great, and I love your the blue collar mentality. I think is huge. And I want to stay right here too before I'm going to ask Sydney, who was going to be on the call, but she couldn't make it, and this is kind of her question. It kind of goes back in your bio as well. So what was something that surprised you, or maybe you did not expect during that journey of becoming a strength coach, or where you're at right now?
Yeah. So, and sometimes I hate bringing it back to the male female thing. But it was interesting to me. I think I went through my first 3 years not thinking there was a difference between me and anybody I worked with. And I mean, I worked with men pretty much exclusively. I had a female strength coach throughout college, but then other than that, it was pretty much working with male coworkers. And I was asked on an interview how I could be a good mentor towards this coach's male athletes. And it surprised me because I had never thought about that before. I had worked with male athletes and I had never thought anything either way. So it really caught me off guard, and might have been the death of me on that interview. But the crazy thing is, the more women I talk to, the more I understand that might be a question that you get asked on every single interview. And so instead of, complaining about it, saying it's not the way it should be, make sure you've got a good answer for it. What it should have been for me is, hey, Andrea Hootie's doing a pretty good job at Kansas. She worked with UConn men's and women's basketball, won a few national championships there, and then moved on to Kansas. And I think won like 12 Big 12 championships in a row or something like that with Kansas men's basketball. That should have been my answer, but I was so caught off guard, I didn't really know what to give. So that was the biggest surprise, was that there was actually a difference, male to female, even though, we tend to think there shouldn't be, but you got to think about what coaches might ask on those interviews too.
Yeah. Every interview I think is definitely a learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly didn't have to answer that question, but there were some other questions that I could definitely relate to that. I was like, man, I was not prepared for that. That's probably what got me.
Yep.
No, that's great insight though. And I think for, any female strength coach, like Coach JB on our call, that's great advice. One job as strength coaches that we get to do is help in that process of, developing leaders and building like team camaraderie. So is there anything in specific or ways you like to do that in particular?
Yeah. So the first thing I always do is go to the coaches. So, when I got job at Eastern, when I got my job at Kentucky, the first thing I'm doing is sitting down with the coaches. You've got to know what their leadership style is, where they're coming from, what they want to achieve. Because at the end of the day, you've got to kind of line up with what they're trying to do, especially when you come into a new job where you're trying to fit into their system and still make an impact. So I'm always sitting down with coaches first. I'll always ask them to, I don't know who your kids are. I don't know who your captains are. I don't know who your leaders are. So I ask them, who are those people on your team? If I need to communicate some stuff, who should I be communicating through? Are there people who you guys want to be leaders that maybe don't have that vocal piece yet? Like, what is it that you're looking for within your program? After that, camaraderie piece for me. I'm a big believer in kind of putting people through tough workouts and a grind, and it brings up conflict. And I think the best way to make sure that teammates have each other's backs is to put them through something hard, get them on each other, and then showing them, hey, look at what you did. Look at how much better you are from going through this. So at every school I've been to and every team I've worked with, kids will reach out to me a handful of years later and they're like, hey, do you remember this run that you put us through? I mean, it was the worst thing ever. And my answer is usually no, I really don't remember what you're talking about. But they always remember it, and they remember how much better they were from it. And even had kids at, UMKC telling me, a game was getting really hard or we were in overtime or whatever. And I just remembered, like, man, I remember that one workout that Coach Rankin put us through absolute hell and back, and I was better from it. And that's kind of what got them going through. I think a lot of that's the craziness in me from being a former soccer player. I ran a lot in college. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of creating conflict, and then showing them how much better they got from that. Hard lifts too. So, you know, if I've got a team that is able to do it, I'll max them out in some sort of capacity every single week. I mean, it's not necessarily every single lift or anything like that, but a big part of that is the spotting piece. So when I was working with swim at Kentucky, the men's swim team was really, really good at it. We do one failure set. I kind of did an APRE style with them. We do one failure set on squat, and you had to have a spotter who could pull you up out of it when you weren't going to come up out of the squat. So even just down to that, knowing, hey, when I start to fail, my teammates got my back and they're going to pull me up out of it. And then kind of last thing, just nurturing and showing them leadership. So I can remember a tough run that we did when I was at Kentucky with my women's soccer team. And one of my captains was out with injury. She'd had a season-ending injury. And she was a really quiet type, like definitely a lead by example type, but really, really quiet. So during this run, you know, some people weren't making their time. Some people weren't finishing all the way through the line. And I know that they got sick of hearing my voice. So I went over to her and I was like, hey, Gina, you know, what do you see? And she was kind of telling me what she saw. And I said, say something. Like, don't make it be me every single time. So I kind of forced her to step up and be a little bit of a vocal leader. But I don't think everybody's necessarily built for that role. She didn't like being that vocal type, but she needed to be. That's what we needed at that time. So it was a matter of me kind of showing her like, hey, this is when to do it. When you say something, I will back you up on it 100%, but make sure you start calling people out if it's not good enough. It's your program.
Yeah, that's great, Coach. And I want to kind of stay right there a little bit too. And Anthony Hansen has a question for you regarding kind of elite athletes and traits of elite athletes. Hansen, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Hey, Coach. Yeah, just kind of coming more from an athlete's perspective, what would you say are a few just kind of common themes or traits that you see in your elite athletes that you've worked with?
Yeah. I'd say the biggest thing is trust. They trust their coaches, and they're kind of bought into the process. So I think when you talk about trust, there's a few components to it. They know they've got to show up every single day and work their butts off. And we've all had those kids who were the best player on their team, but maybe they don't work hard in the weight room. But my thought is they work hard somewhere. There's something that they do where they know that there's a process to it. Maybe it's working on, you know, a soccer player, maybe it's working on foot skills and going out and doing 30 minutes of work every single day. Some part of them trusts a process. But it's kind of knowing that they need to show up every single day, put the work in. One of the best things I've heard was from Lars Jorgensen, my head swim coach at Kentucky. And I'd never thought of it this way. And I'd been in coaching for, 8 years by this point when he said it. But, you talk about sometimes an athlete will just have a bad day. They're just kind of going through it in practice. It's not really there. And maybe their effort drops off a little bit. What he'd talk to him about is, hey, we've got 12 sessions a week. So we've got 9 sessions of swimming a week and then 3 lifts. If you decide to take one of those off, just one of them, that's 8% of your training for that week. And when he kind of stuck a percentage with it, I was like, man, that's crazy. Like, that's given up a lot. Like, when you're talking about a high level athlete, giving up 8% of your training just because you weren't quite feeling it that day, or you didn't eat before practice or whatever, that's a lot to be given up. And another example I've got from swim, and this is a really good example, Danielle Gallier was our first individual national champion for swimming. She won the 200 back. And when she was interviewed afterwards, swimming is a very process-based sport. If you don't trust the process, then you taper at the wrong time. So you really need to be able to trust your coaches. That doesn't mean you can't have input, but you need to be able to trust your coaches. And that's exactly what she talked about right when she got out of the pool. They kind of asked her, how'd you do it? And it was, I trusted the process. Even when I thought, my coaches were crazy, and they were killing me at practice, or they were killing me in the weight room, I trusted the process because I know that they know what they're doing. So I think that the biggest thing is trust. We could talk about 9 million other things, but if you don't trust that the people coaching you know what they're doing, I think it can really slow you down.
Coach, what is maybe a hurdle you've had to overcome maybe throughout your journey so far? We've all had those, and certainly people have different ones, but maybe what's a tough challenge you've had to overcome during your strength conditioning career so far?
Yep. For me, it's been, and I know I talked about this a little bit earlier, it's been trying to figure out how to kind of move up the ladder. And it's not that I'm, crazy about being a director. I certainly didn't get into this to make, $500,000 a year. But it's trying to figure out how to keep advancing a little bit. So, went from a job at Arkansas to, you could probably call it a lateral move, going to UMKC. But for me, it was what I needed to do. When I tried to, I went through the interview process of being a director there. Multitude of reasons why I didn't get it. The guy who got hired had, years and years of experience on me, knew how to build a program better than I did, but there was just no upward mobility for me anymore at UMKC. And then at Kentucky, kind of same thing. Steph Tracy had been the director, moved up to an AD position. Coach Spurlock, Coach DeVrent both got promoted. They did a great job there, and they got no real reason to leave. They've done a great job with the Olympic side there. So just trying to figure out how I can kind of keep moving up the ladder a little bit. I'm a competitive person. It's not that I need to be the director on staff. It's not that I need to make tons and tons of money. But I do kind of like having a bigger say with bigger decisions going on. I think it was Megan Young talking the other day that if you ever want to have say, you've got to be at a higher level. You've got to be in those meetings where, ADs are talking about big decisions. So if you don't even have a seat at the table, you're never going to have that say. So just trying to figure out how to move up the ladder. There's not very many director positions out there. It's hard to get that. So just trying to figure out, is it stuff I need on my resume? Is it people I need to know to talk to, whatever. But I think that's probably something that a lot of people struggle with, not just me in particular.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's, I hear that a lot from coaches. And now you are a director now, since September now at Eastern Connecticut. So
yep.
What I'd like to go to now is I'm going to have our coach Devin here hop in and ask his question regarding staff management and kind of how you do that. So Devin, why don't you fire away here?
Yeah. So how do you develop your staff around you to keep growing a successful culture for the athletes to be a part of?
Yep. So it is, it's a little interesting here because I'm the only paid staff member. I was given one intern. He had wanted to intern even before I got here. And then somebody else joined up in the spring, and they've both been really good. So when I was at UMKC, there wasn't any sort of exercise science major. So it was really hard to get people who were really interested in the field. At Eastern, that is a big program. The professors are really good. So I've got, interns who are helping me out who are interested in being strength and conditioning coaches. But it's been a matter of, having people who can fill in my gaps. So I'd say that about any staff is you should be hiring people as a director who can kind of fill in stuff that you're not as good at. And they kind of take care of your blind spots. That's one thing that True, when he hired me at UMKC, was really good with, was things he wasn't very good with, I was really good at, and things that I wasn't very good at, he was really good at. I always kind of say that was like the best partnership I'll ever have in my whole career, because we were such a good team. Another thing being just being a safe place to kind of collaborate. And I think all of us have been on those staffs where you don't feel like you can say what your opinion is because you feel like it's going to get shot down, it's going to get rejected. You're going to be made to feel like you don't know what you're talking about, all that type of stuff. Whether it's a young strength coach or an older strength coach on my staff, I want them to feel comfortable saying whatever they're thinking about. I'm a big collaborator. I think having diversity of thought and having a lot of different opinions is really, really important. Now, at the end of the day, director has to make a decision. Same thing with any sports team, is you've always got to have someone who's making the decisions. But I like everybody to have a voice. I think it's much better for buy-in, and I think you get a lot of good ideas, even from people who, maybe you wouldn't think they had that idea because they've never talked about it, but just letting them express that stuff and being a safe place to talk about it. Allowing staff to make mistakes. If you don't ever make mistakes, you don't get to really learn and grow. We've all made plenty of mistakes, but you've also got to give people the chance to own those mistakes. So even with my teams, I'll talk to them about, hey, maybe for that run, maybe I shouldn't have set 18 seconds as your goal. Maybe it should have been 20. Like, I'm sorry, I screwed that up. I'll reevaluate next time. But when people know that you're human, they'll buy into it a lot more. If you've got people on staff who don't allow you to be human, that's an issue too. But you got to be able to let people make mistakes and then let them own up to it. And then kind of last thing is being able to delegate tasks. I know that I can sometimes be really bad with that because I know I'm very detail oriented. So sometimes it's hard for me to say, hey, I want you to go take care of this. So what I've learned is you have to say, hey, this is the task I want to have, X, Y, and Z within it. I need you to have it turned into me by Wednesday of next week at 5 p.m. And that way there's a project. And then you work really hard on it. And then you go back to your boss with it. And they're like, yeah, I don't like this. And it's like, man, I just spent so many hours working on this. Like, if you would have just told me that it needed to be this way, then that's what I would have done. So giving people ownership of projects, but also kind of telling them a little bit of guidance on how they need to get there. And kind of last thing I'll say with that is the athletes see that stuff. So part of the question was relating it back to the culture of the athletes that you work with. Athletes see when their staff doesn't get along, whether it's their sports staff or their strength and conditioning staff. They see that stuff and they see if you get along really well. So if you don't have your staff straight, I think it really, really affects the athletes that you work with, which at the end of the day, that's why we all have jobs. That's what we're trying to do, is make them better and make them better teammates and better people and better athletes. So you got to be able to take care of home before you can take care of them.
I think that's a great point, Coach, because when you said that, I thought back to all the successful sport teams that I've been able to be a part of, and some much more successful than the others. But the ones who are really successful, there's just something different about I'm talking more from a sport coach staff side. Just, you can tell that staff loves each other and they're all in on it. And then we've all seen the staffs too, where maybe that team's struggling. And it's just so obvious that staff is not on the same page. So I think that's a great point, really great point. And Coach, I want to change gears, maybe just a touch here. Let's talk a little training, X's and O's. What is kind of your principles or your training philosophy, or however you want to answer that question? Kind of, how do you train your athletes typically?
Yeah. So Jill's gotten to kind of see this when she was with me at Kentucky. But I kind of follow a concurrent system, and maybe everybody would say that. But I think, at least with the sports I've generally worked with, you've got to be able to have all qualities available to you at all times. So as a soccer player, you've got to be aerobically fit. You have to be able to sprint, and you have to be agile. Number one, if you're not fit, you won't see the field. So that always has to be priority number one. The speed and strength plays into, being quick on the field. Speed obviously is really important for soccer because, if you're a forward, for example, that's how you score, is you separate from your defender. So you've got to have that quick acceleration. Especially as a defender, a goalkeeper, you've got to be very agile. For me, what's important is to not say, hey, we're only going to train aerobic fitness right now, and then we're going to move on to this, and then we're going to move on to this. You have to constantly be training all that stuff, because otherwise that's where I've seen injuries pop up. If you neglect speed training and you don't sprint, and then all of a sudden you try to introduce it, you're pulling hamstrings. So you've always got to, for me, I've always got to have that stuff plugged in. And in the weight room too, my first boss at Arkansas, Todd Barber, did sort of a, I don't know if this is how he'd talk about it, so I certainly don't want to put words in his mouth, but kind of a conjugate system. Now, not strict West Side, he wasn't crazy, but kind of had that theory where and a reps day. I don't do it the way he did it, but I did take some of those components with doing, max sets of pull-ups, or maybe a max set of squat or bench, but also some pure speed stuff too. So kind of having some different methods in the weight room. I'm a big Olympic lifting fan, so I did it helped me out a ton as a goalkeeper. I had to have been the shortest goalkeeper in the Big 12. And I know that the Olympic lifts helped me out a ton. So I always start off with an Olympic lift, strength movement after that, and then the accessory work kind of hits everything else that you need. But then also, obviously anybody would say this, but looking at the injuries of the sport and how we can kind of try to help reduce those. So.
We run a pretty similar system too. We're pretty concurrent, if I had to describe it. I was a fan of your answer there. That's good.
Good.
But I know that's just a topic that everybody can just get way down the rabbit holes on and have very strong feelings about and stuff. But it all works, I think. But I did think that, and the reason why I've always tried to do it too, when you said injuries pop up when you neglect the quality and try to reintroduce it, I've certainly seen that. In my short time training athletes too. So I want to give my chance for my staff. Do you guys have any more questions for Coach before we kind of get here on our lightning finishing round? All right, hearing none, let's do it. So we guys got 4 quick questions for you, Coach, and then we'll let you get on with the rest of your day. Sound good?
I don't do good under pressure, so I wrote some stuff down predicting maybe some questions that might come up.
All right, sounds good. What's the best piece of coaching advice you've ever received?
I would say, and I hope this doesn't sound pessimistic, but early on in my career, I was told to just really watch out for yourself, because you never know if other people are going to have your back. I was raised in a team environment where you're supposed to have each other's backs, but I think when it comes down to your career, you've always got to kind of look out for your best interest and make moves that are going to get you to wherever you want to be specifically. So just making sure that you're taking care of yourself.
That's good. You have 15 minutes to train yourself. What are you doing?
Yeah, it's funny with all this time recently, you'd think everybody's got a whole bunch of time to do stuff. And then I'm like, nah, I got like 30 minutes to knock something out. But I just like keeping it basic. Some kind of squat movement, whether it's a bilateral or unilateral squat, an upper body press, so push up, military press, whatever, post chain movement, RDL, leg curl, and then an upper body pull. And me personally, if I've only got 15 minutes, I'm also going to squeeze in a little bit of upper body, some bis and tris or extra push-ups or something like that. I got a really bad back, so if I can hit some upper body, I'm still feeling good.
That's good. This is kind of a new question you've been asking. It's kind of fun. So what is the most embarrassing moment you've had coaching your athletes?
Most embarrassing moment. I know that there have been a couple times where I'm demoing a movement and I just eat it. Like maybe it was an agility. I think with soccer at Kentucky one time, I was demoing an agility movement early in the morning where there was some dew on the field, and I was trying to do it super athletic and really quick, and I just ate it.
Yeah, that happens to all of us. I'll do a lot of we're doing jumps and sticks and stuff. Like you need to land in this athletic position, then I just land like a complete unathletic idiot. I was like, yeah, don't
Yep.
do it that way. Let me try again.
Yep.
All right, Coach, the last one I got for you. Who's a small school coach that you think does a really great job, who deserves maybe a shout out?
Yeah, a lot of my stuff in my career, I always point back to Sarah Ramey. West Texas A&M is a D2. She does a phenomenal job down there. She, like I said, she's the one who got me interested in strength and conditioning. So she's certainly a mentor, but she's also a friend and someone I stay in touch with. But I think at one point she had told me that she had more guys in the NFL than some of the Big 12 schools in the state of Texas. But she does a phenomenal job down there at West Texas A&M.
Awesome. Yeah, I know her a little bit, but she's on my list of people to talk to for the show. So
Yeah,
solidified that for me. So
she would be great.
Yeah.
She'd be great.
that's great. All right, Coach. Again, we appreciate your time. I appreciate you joining us and talking to our staff, and Coach Brown for kind of initiating this and getting us together. And I hope you stay safe out there. Like you said, you're kind of hour away from New York, which is kind of a hot spot right now, and within the coronavirus. And I see your pictures of your dogs back there too. So I hope you enjoy your time in quarantine with your dogs, and good luck there at East Connecticut whenever we get back rolling again.
Yep. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Coach. See you later.
Bye,
Yep.
Coach.
Thank you, Coach.
Thank you, guys.